I'm very happy to introduce Gabriela, Mejias, and Nabil Ksibi from ORCID, who will start our research identity and ORCID webinar, and then Milica Ševkušić will continue with training approaches on research identities and ORCID. So over to you, Nabil.
All right, so thank you so much, Irina, and this is a great pleasure to be here for this webinar. So I have along with me Gabriela Mejias, who is the engagement manager for global consortia in ORCID. I myself, I'm the engagement lead for global consortia at ORCID. Today we're gonna talk about what is ORCID, why we are here, what are we doing, and how are we participating in many linking research contributions to their contributors. So if we start with what is ORCID, and to start with the ORCID vision. So ORCID is a world, or ORCID vision is a world where all who participate in research, scholarship, and innovation are uniquely identified and connected to their contributions and affiliations across time, disciplines, and borders. So this is very defining what is ORCID, what's the vision of ORCID, and how ORCID is basically operating to win the trust of the community and to basically serve the community in providing this identification for authors and to link contributions to contributors. Sorry, I'm gonna quickly move this. Then again, what is ORCID? So ORCID as an organization is a nonprofit open organization, which is created and led by the research community. So when I say created and by and for the research communities, that means that our board of members and the, let's say, persons that are helping or supporting in defining the ORCID strategy for the future are really elected from the community of members, and all our members do provide their voice and their contribution into participating in this vote and to electing the board of members. Then ORCID is a unique persistent identifier, free to use for the individuals. And let's say, the ORCID records do contain affiliations, works, and fundings. So this unique persistent identifier is helping contributors and individuals to connect basically all these affiliations and works and funding information into their ORCID records. And ORCID is also a registry or a hub to synchronize data. We are now serving more than 11 million ID registered on the registry, and you can have more insight on the ORCID statistics from the ORCID website that is publicly shared for the public. Then this is the structure of the ORCID ID. So this is let's say an hyperlink that you can use, including 16-digit constituting or forming this ID. So this is a persistent and unique identifier for individuals, researchers, and contributors. Let's say the components of this ID are 16-character alphanumeric code, and the IT complies with ISO 27729 code. So if we expand a bit on this, you can say that the ORCID ID is, as I said, an HTTPS URI that is compatible with those ISO standards, and also known as ISNI, or International Standard Name Identifier. And we have a block of numbers basically reserved for this purpose, and this is how this is giving this global or normalized way of having this identifier. And it's very important to also note that there is no information about a person that is encoded in the ORCID ID. So this is when a person really would like to remove all the informations that are related to that ORCID ID, they can do so, or even deactivate the ORCID ID. We are only keeping this let's say this ID as hashed somewhere secured in the database, and no information about this person is or will be still kept in the link to the ORCID ID. Then the last character of the ID is a checksum. So this is checksum. It must be from 0 to 9 or X, and the X is representing the value of 10. And it's also important to mention that IDs are never reused or removed, right? So no one can use another person's, another ORCID ID that was deactivated previously, or that is used previously. Then I think this is my part. So now I would like to introduce Gabriela. So Gabriela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nabil, and thanks also, Irina, for inviting us to participate in this webinar. So after this short introduction on ORCID, I'd like to share with you some tips and tricks on how to train both researchers, students, and contributors on making the most of ORCID to better curate their digital identity. Next slide, please. Great. So something very important to mention is that both privacy and researcher control are core principles for us at ORCID. Every item of the ORCID record has a visibility setting that only the researcher can manage. So when people register for an ORCID ID, they need to select one of the visibility settings for their ORCID record. Public, meaning everybody can access this information, and all the information that is marked as public will be visible in the ORCID user interface and also via our APIs. Then the second level is trusted parties. This means that only trusted organizations are ORCID member organizations that have developed an application or an integration that allowed our users to connect the ID, and the users have granted permission. So only after that permission has been granted, an organization becomes a trusted organization, and only these organizations can access this information level. And the last one is private, meaning only the record holder will be able to see this information. This won't be available to member organizations or via the user interface. And because we are GDPR compliant, when a user registers, email addresses are marked as private by default. So every piece of information that you add to an ORCID record can be added with one of these privacy settings. As you can see from the slide, most of the users select to have their information public and available for everyone. And for transparency purposes, you can see under account settings all the list of trusted organizations, meaning that users can see who they granted permission to, which organizations, which applications can access information on the record, when this permission has been granted, and also what type of permissions, if they can read, obtain the ORCID ID, read information from that record, or write information to that record. And also users can revoke these permissions at any time. So at any time they can go to the account settings, the list of trusted organizations, and select the trash can icon and remove those permissions. And on the slide on the bottom, more information about trusted organizations and also ORCID and GDPR. Next slide, please. And a very common question is how does ORCID avoid duplicate? Sorry, I thought there was a slide before that. That one, yes. Yeah, no worries. So we do have some methods to prevent duplicate IDs from being created. So when someone registers, we run an email check. And this means if that email address is already registered in the ORCID registry, you can't register a second ID with that email address. And we also run a name check. So if there's someone with the same name on the ORCID registry, will display a message as the one you can see on the left, and will display the name, the affiliations, and a link to that ORCID record, so that you can verify if that ID belongs to yourself or not. And something very important is that we recommend everybody to add multiple email addresses to an ORCID record, so that we can prevent generating or registering new IDs with those email addresses, and so that you can prevent losing access to your ORCID account. If you had access to, if you have previously registered an ORCID ID but have lost access, we have a dedicated support team that can help with those requests. So you can always contact support at orcid.org for any of these cases. Next slide, please. And sometimes, even if we run these checks to prevent duplicated IDs, anyway, duplicate IDs are created. So we also have a method to merge or unify multiple ORCID IDs. So this is something that only the record holders or their trusted individuals can trigger. And to do this, the users need to go to their account settings, go to remove duplicate ORCID record, and enter the email address and password of those other or duplicated IDs. So once you deprecate or unify multiple ORCID IDs, there will be a deprecated or deactivated ORCID ID that will point to the new and the primary ORCID ID. So as Nabil said previously, ORCID IDs are never reused or removed. When an ORCID ID is deprecated or deactivated, we remove all the information connected to that ID from our registry. And when two IDs are merged, The only information that gets transferred to the primary ID is the email address, and the deprecated record will show as an ID that has been deprecated and will point to the primary record, and on the slide you'll find an example of how that looks like. Next slide, please. And something to improve your identification via ORCID is connecting other identifiers to your ORCID ID. So one of the things that make ORCID unique is that it is interoperable. So it can connect with multiple systems, multiple organizations, across disciplines, across countries, and more. So on the biographical section of the ORCID record, you can see that it's possible to connect other names, including other spellings of your name in different alphabets. You can also connect country information, keywords, and it's also possible to connect other identifiers. Something important to say here is that this information cannot be added manually by the users, but they need to do this via an application or an integration. Again, users need to grant permission to that organization to connect this information into ORCID records. So as you can see, the most connected identifier on the ORCID registry is the Scopus identifier. Close to 60% of the ORCID records have a Scopus identifier connected. Other very popular identifiers are ResearcherID, the Loop profile, Science ID from Portugal, and the fifth one is iAuthor, which is an identifier from China. Next, please. And affiliations are also, you can also connect affiliation data to ORCID records. When we started the registry, we only had two affiliation types, education and employment. But with the release of our schema, of the ORCID schema 3.0, we added new affiliation types. Previously, we also collected feedback from the community on which kind of affiliations, which kind of information would be helpful to be recognized via ORCID. And that's how we ended with new affiliation types. And these include qualifications, membership and service, invited positions, and distinctions. And on the example, you can see an affiliation added by Concitec, which is an organization from Peru that is adding a qualification and is also connecting, in this case, the certificate of or the document certifying that this person is a registered research in their database. And as you can see below, education and employment are the most popular affiliation types. And we still have a lot of work to do with the new affiliation types. And we hope that you'll help us promote these new affiliation types that users can connect to their ORCID records. Next, please. Contributions, or how we call them in the ORCID schema, works. So we aim to improve recognition for a wide range of contributions beyond journal articles. And that's how we started building this functionality in ORCID. We currently support 45 different work types. or contribution types. Originally, we've included these, or we used the CASRAE output standard vocabulary. And then this continued evolving based on our community and on our integrators' feedback. So among those 44 work types, we recently migrated, also with our change, with our release of our schema 3.0, we migrated dissertation to dissertation thesis as a more general contribution type. We've also added support for preprints software. And a couple of weeks ago, we've added support for data management plan. So it is now possible to connect data management plan, software, preprints, dissertation thesis in ORCID records, and other type of contributions as well. Something interesting from ORCID is that multiple sources can connect the same contribution type. So as you can see on this example, it's an example from my ORCID record. This is the ORCID public data file that we release every year during Open Access Week, and that contains a snapshot of all the public information on the ORCID registry. So this is a data set, as you can see on the slide, that has been connected to my ORCID record. In this case, you can see that the source of this information is DataCite, and you can see that this is the preferred source of 4, meaning there are 4 sources connecting this information into my ORCID ID, and these are grouped together based on the identifier. So in this case, these 4 works share the same identifier, in this case a DOI, and that's how we're able to group them together. And for us, this actually increases the trust in this information, because there are multiple sources or organizations saying that a person has contributed to a contribution or a work. And although we support 44 different contribution types, if you see at the information, the statistics of the ORCID registry, 80% of those contributions that we currently have on the ORCID registry, we currently have more than 72 million of works connected. From those, 80% are journal articles, followed by conference papers, book chapters, and books. So there's still a lot of work to do in the path to improving recognition for these contributions in the ORCID registry. And again, we hope that you will help us promote all these different contribution types that can be connected and linked to an ORCID record. And something also new that we announced 2 weeks ago is that we are adding support for credit contributor roles. Credit also started as a CASRAE initiative, and now there's an ISO working group that is proposing or drafting a proposal to make the credit contributor roles an ISO standard. ORCID is part of that work, and we aim to improve recognition for different kind of contributions. So that's why we've added support for credit contributor roles. Currently, only member integrators connecting contributions to ORCID record can connect credit contributor roles. But we're working to add this functionality on the user interface as well, meaning that in the future, users will be able to include the contributor roles as part of the work or the contribution metadata. So for example, users will be able to connect a conference or a journal article, and they will be able to assert that they have, for example, translation is one of the contributor roles. So they will be able to specify the kind of the contribution. Next, please. And although there are many ways of connecting works into ORCID records, we recommend especially two methods. One is the Crossref and DataCite auto updates. Crossref and DataCite had built a mechanism to automatically add new works to ORCID records. In the case of Crossref, whenever they generate a DOI that includes an ID on the metadata, they will push a notification to that ORCID record asking that person for permission to write this metadata into the ORCID record. If the user authorizes, then every time Crossref generates a DOI with that ID embedded in the metadata, they will continue to write that metadata on that record automatically. And this reduces a lot of time for researchers because they don't have to enter this information manually. And it allows to have an ORCID record updated without much manual effort. And DataCite has a similar workflow. So if the user grants permission to DataCite, then every time they generate a new DOI, they will be able to also update that ORCID record. And the other recommended way is to use one of our existing search and link wizards. So Crossref and DataCite also have built this tool. So it's possible especially for new people registering into ORCID. This is a good way of building their ORCID record without much effort. Base is also a very interesting tool. Base is a search engine operated by the Bielefeld University, and they index and connect information from more than 8,000 content providers. They index metadata from multiple providers, and this includes journal and also institutional repositories and digital collections. So this is a great tool for everybody to use. Also Europe PubMed Central allows to import works from their database, and this include articles, all articles indexed in PubMed Central. And this includes journal articles, preprints, patents, and more. And two new tools we've released this year. One is the OpenAIRE Explore Search and Link Wizard. This import works, allows to import works from OpenAIRE Explore, including journal articles, data sets, software, and other research outputs. And this was released on March 25, so more than a month ago. And so far they have pushed or written close to 4,000 works in the ORCID registry. So also a good database to import your works and keep your ORCID record connected. And also earlier this year, we've released the Lens Search and Link Wizard. And the Lens collects or has information about patent and scholarly works on their platform. So this is also something new that allows to connect patent information into ORCID records. Next slide, please. And to finish, peer review We aim as part of our work to recognize all kind of contributions to scholarship. We support recognition of peer review activities. Currently, we have more than 4 million peer reviews connected in the ORCID registry. And this functionality is based also on the CASRE peer review services data profile. And we support multiple kind of reviews, both anonymous and open peer reviews. We have some minimum metadata requirements, but it's possible also to connect anonymous or blind peer review. This information can only be connected or be written by member integrators or by trusted parties. So you will not see this section on the ORCID record unless there's an organization that connected this information. And again, for that to happen, the researchers need to grant permission to that organization. Something interesting to mention is that PubLens has also developed an auto-update functionality, meaning that the first time the reviewer performs or reviews something and connect their ORCID ID to their PubLens account, PubLens will collect permission to write that information into the ORCID record, and then every 2 weeks they will automatically push new review activities into an ORCID record. So this is also a good functionality to have peer reviews added automatically to an ORCID record. And as you can see, for those 4 million of peer reviews currently added into the ORCID registry, PubLens has added more than half of it. So again, this is a functionality that helps reducing the burden on the researcher. And with this, we conclude our part, and we hope to answer your questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabi and Nabil. That was excellent, and a lot of new functionalities. Very happy to see that. So let's listen to Milica, and then we'll take questions. And please, colleagues, use Q&A for questions. Thanks a lot for adding your questions already.
Again,
We'll address them.
I'm sharing the link to my presentation for those who would prefer to look at on their computers. Now I'm sharing my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, not in a presentation mode yet.
Yes, I will switch to the presentation mode, which
Yes.
I hate, but doesn't matter.
Yes.
So, well, we've met already. As you know, I work as a research librarian, so I will share some practical advice and actually describe the types of training we are doing with regard to researcher identifiers, not only ORCID, but some others as well. So in Serbia, we use 2 alphabets, and the Cyrillic and the Latin, and also our Latin alphabet has a diacritical signs, which means that they are sometimes very complicated to be resolved in citation databases and other databases. So our researchers in Serbia, they're fully aware of the need for services such as ORCID, or for some codified and universal and interoperable author IDs that would facilitate the process of their recognition, that would increase their visibility and make it easier for them to identify their works, their papers, mostly in the Web of Science and Scopus, and to pick up all the citations and to track this information. Furthermore, our research evaluation system heavily relies on impact factors and citation counts, so it's very important for them. So we started, I personally started this at an early stage. I started working at this institute 14 years ago, and it was the next year in 2008 that we started sending, completing feedback forms and sending feedback to Scopus, requesting some changes in the names, linking documents with author IDs. Scopus creates author IDs automatically. They are generated based on the metadata from papers, so there are quite many errors until they train the algorithm to recognize them more efficiently. At that time, there were really many errors related to, for example, I have a researcher at my institute who has a name which is quite unique. It is quite an uncommon name, and there were 5 profiles in Scopus related to this single name. So we started with submitting correction requests. Then in 2008, Web of Science ResearcherID appeared, and we started using it at the moment it appeared. As soon as it appeared, we registered a few profiles at the institute, tested it, and started using it. And it was about that time that when I started talking to my colleagues since about 2009, there was an increasing demand for training on ResearcherID and submitting corrections in Scopus, and I started touring through institutes in research institutes in Belgrade, explaining to researchers and librarians how to do this. So this was quite popular at that time. And then some years later, in 2015, when we organized training within a librarians association, research librarians are members of this association, we made a kind of a program where we offered a standardized training for this, a lecture and a workshop. And then again, I started touring to institutions in Serbia, presenting this and organizing workshops. In 2012, when ORCIDs appeared, we introduced them immediately. So all those researchers who had ResearcherID, we pushed them to register an ORCID ID. And then what propelled our research efforts were video tutorials recorded by our colleague Biljana Kosanovic in November 2017. It was a part of a project, and the idea was to celebrate the 5th anniversary of ORCIDs. So after that, many researchers registered. Until that moment, there were about 3,000 of them who had profiles, but these profiles were incomplete. The quality of data they provided after these video tutorials was much better. And then we introduced a series of advanced trainings on ORCIDs. I will explain what it's all about later. So what you need to take into account when advocating for researcher identifiers and the adoption of research identifiers in your local environment. First, there are some environments where there are already some established local identifiers imposed by a ministry or by a research evaluation system. You have to take them into account. So you need to find a way to integrate the universally, globally accepted identifiers with those that are locally used. Also, there are some policies that impose the use of some, for example, there are institutions in Serbia, the Faculty of Chemistry mandates the application, the use of ORCIDs. So all of their research staff and teaching staff, they all need to have to register for an ORCID ID. So these policies should also be taken into account. If an institution, for example, requires ResearcherID, then of course you will have to lay stronger focus on this kind of researcher identifier. Also, there are some needs and preferences of local research communities. For example, our research community in Serbia, especially in STEM, has a strong preference for Scopus IDs because they're using Scopus when preparing their citation reports for promotion procedures. So we need to take this into account as well. We cannot skip the Scopus ID in our trainings. And also, it's very important to reach out to decision makers. For example, in Serbia, we have some kind of internal identifiers that are used in another failed CRIS system. But actually, we are now trying to reach out to decision makers to push them to introduce ORCIDs as something that will be adopted in our research community. So this is basically the scheme of the training, the approaches we take. We have basically two types of trainings in terms of topics. One is this is actually the legacy type of training introduced before ORCIDs were introduced. It covers all researcher IDs that are relevant for our research community. So Scopus ID, Researcher's ID, Researcher ID, for the Web of Science Researcher ID, ORCID, and it also covers social networking websites and Google Scholar, which are quite popular among our researchers. And we actually trying to explain to them the differences of the social networking websites and the officially adopted, globally adopted researcher identifiers. These are usually lectures and hands-on training. It largely depends on the technical possibilities at the institution where we are organizing the training. The other and the importance of this part is increasing is training on ORCIDs. We have video tutorials. I will show later and share the link. We have them since 2017. These are 5 videos, 6 to 7 minutes long. Then we also have lectures and demos where we explain the basic concepts. We explain the differences between ORCID IDs and the other identifiers that are in use in our country. And we explain practically how to create a profile, how to populate it with publications and other information, and how to integrate it with some existing infrastructures, institutional websites, repositories, social networking websites, etc. So we try to organize hands-on training whenever possible. So these demos and lectures are actually organized when it's not possible to organize hands-on training. When we organize hands-on training, then this theoretical part is shorter. We have a very brief introduction, and then we switch to creating the profile, populating it. And also, since 2017, we introduced an advanced training for this, when we explain to researchers how to use the BibTeX import option to add their publication. I've already mentioned this. I mentioned this when I was talking about institutional repositories. So those of you who were present will probably remember the fact that we are using 2 alphabets, that we have quite many publications that don't have DOIs, especially in social sciences and humanities. They cannot be added using the search and link option, even if through OpenAIRE Explore, this option supports only the records with PIDs. It's important to have an alternative way to ingest this data into ORCID profiles. And we actually designed this training wishing to support our researchers and to encourage our researchers in social sciences and humanities to adopt more eagerly ORCID profiles. This is basically the scheme with the durations of all these types of training. Usually, it's advisable from experience. For me, a maximum of 12 participants is something that can work efficiently in a session. and it's advisable to have an assistant, because when each user has a computer, something may happen. Some of them are less skilled, so if there is only one presenter, then it may happen that one less skilled participant can practically undermine the workshop, because they will require troubleshooting. They get angry if they don't get help instantly. So it's advisable to have an assistant. These workshops are very, very intensive. You feel completely drained after them. There are many questions, there are many interventions. So we usually have one researcher working on the main computer, and he or she is assisted by the trainer, and all the others are trying to reproduce on their computers the same steps, and they just call for help. So, but it works quite well, and these workshops are quite efficient. Since 2017, after these video tutorials were created, we are more likely to organize advanced training. So we usually advise to researchers to do the previous steps by following the video tutorials, and then we gather together to add publications that cannot be added using the search and link functionality. We also have training materials. These materials are in Serbian, but they are quite self-explaining. There are many images, so just feel free to have a look and use and reuse. And there is a link to video tutorials. This third link is actually you may find it useful. It explains how to add the link to link publications and profiles in ORCID using the BibTeX import option. So I'll briefly cover our training focuses when we discuss other types of researcher identifiers other than ORCIDs, and I will cover ORCIDs as well. So Scopus Author ID appeared at the same time as Scopus appeared. It's an identifier that is automatically generated, and it's very important for researchers, as I've already mentioned. So basically, when we organize trainings, I try to explain that there are quite many errors, and that these errors need to be corrected. That the action is required to correct these errors. And then I explain the procedure, how to submit a request, what one can expect after the request is submitted, and that the request should be resubmitted if it's not resolved properly, etc. And we also train them how to connect their Scopus IDs with ORCID IDs. And we also organize training for librarians. Since the beginning of this year, there is an increasing demand because of the reporting system. Our research institutions need to submit annual reports, and now they are required to submit some citation counts. And then I organize for librarians, I organize training when I explain to them how they can use individual Scopus ID profiles, how they can group them and get these citation counts for departments and institutions. So these are mostly organized online, these are new, and there is an increasing demand. We will have to organize more of these trainings. Also, it is important for librarians to know that they can submit, anybody can submit a request for correction to Scopus, so they can submit corrections on behalf of their colleagues, researchers. The Web of Science ResearcherID, it appeared in 2008 because the Web of Science doesn't have this inbuilt profile feature. So it's quite difficult to track citations by using search functionality in the Web of Science. And it was introduced as a sort of response to the Scopus ID. And it was quite popular in Serbia until ORCID IDs appeared. After that, the interest decreased because most of the functions that the researcher ID has are actually they're met, they're addressed by ORCIDs. Now there is an increasing interest. There has been an increasing interest recently because of the integration with PubLons and the possibility to link the peer review information for PubLon with ORCID IDs. But we do these trainings there. We lay the lesser focus on them now, but we do sometimes if required by researchers. I will not explain this in detail because it has already been explained. This is basically the concept of training, the topics that we cover during training. And these are video tutorials. You have a link. It's very important to have these video tutorials in the mother tongue of your research community. Video tutorials were available before, but researchers somehow they didn't use it. The week after Biljana posted them on the website and made them available, more than 700 researchers registered their ORCID profiles within a single week. And this has encouraged them. They realized the importance of them because it was explained in a very simple language in these video tutorials. Also, this is the concept of this advanced training, which is very interesting for researchers in social sciences and humanities. How did we come to the idea to organize this? There was a discussion on Facebook regarding ORCIDs a few days after Biljana had posted her videos, and there were some comments that actually pushed me to organize this. Some people doing research in social sciences and humanities said, this is not for us. This is not good for us. So there are no services that are good enough for us. So I said, okay, I will explain you how to use it and how to do it. So after that, we had many hands-on workshops. We couldn't organize them in institutions, so the University of Belgrade Computer Center let us do it in their computer room, and they were quite popular, and they actually helped increase the adoption rate of ORCIDs among our social sciences and humanities researchers. The idea is to explain that they can find machine-readable metadata in various places, and they are not aware that they can find them, that they can use reference manager software like Zotero to edit this machine-readable metadata that they can import in Zotero, that they can export the metadata from Zotero and import in ORCID profiles. These are simple steps, but they were not aware of this. So this is explained in detail in our presentation, and this was actually very helpful. We also cover Google Scholar and social networking sites quite briefly. The main idea that I want to push when I talk about this is that researchers should give priority to researcher identifiers. And the other idea is if they want to have a profile on a social networking site, it should be maintained, because neglected profiles, there are many such profiles, are actually doing harm to them. It's important to have an updated profile. So this is basically and also we cover the other topics, who owns which and etc. So what are the tricky issues? There are less tricky issues when we talk about this topic because it's interesting to researchers. They somehow immediately understand why it's important for them. So we don't need to explain why there is a need for a unique identifier that would group all of their name variants and in different alphabets. So it's very easy to explain. But the greatest problem here is that they assume that everything is automated. For example, they believe that there are many people who curate Scopus records and that they actually know who they are. So I had many funny situations with senior researchers who say, so you want to say that this is done by an algorithm. They don't actually know who I am, but they should know I'm quite famous. It's very difficult to explain to them that they're not, the people address correction requests. But prior to that step, everything is created actually by algorithms. So once they understand this, then they understand that there is a need to intervene and to submit a correction request. Also, I already explained, researchers in SSH usually believe that ORCID can support only those publications that are indexed in Scopus and Web of Science. So we found a way to deal with this misconception. Also, they don't understand and they want to know what's the relationship between, for example, ORCIDs and social networking websites. And there is another misconception that is related to the first one. They usually believe that it is possible to add the publication data from ResearchGate profiles to Scopus. So I still have such requests. Can you please write to Scopus to add my Google Scholar or my ResearcherID records to my Scopus profile? And it's quite painful and quite difficult to explain to them that this is not possible, and for which reasons it's not possible. One of the one of the staples for our trainings are explanations how to link various researcher identifiers. So to the left, you can see a page from the website of my institute. This is my colleague, and we've listed all the identifiers that researchers have on their web pages on the website. This is a good strategy. I highly recommend it. And they really appreciate it. They like this, and they realize that the institution is behind them and that their visibility is increased by this, and that their identity, researcher identity, is strengthened. So these are examples. You've already seen this. This is Scopus, this is ResearcherID, and this is ORCID, various IDs linked. Also, these are to the left. These are our publishing, open access publishing platforms where ORCIDs are integrated. To the left, to the right bottom, this is a record from our repository, and also in Zenodo. There was a question in Zenodo in the Q&A. I believe that you need to add ORCID ID as metadata in order to facilitate the process of importing the Zenodo records in ORCID profiles. I showed it last time when talking about repositories. So this is a very illustrative example of these are publications that are actually imported into ORCID profiles using the BibTeX import feature. The metadata were exported from an institutional repository and imported in the profile. These are publications that cannot be imported using the search and link facility. Also, this is another example Gabriela has already shown. These are the peer review to the left. These are the peer review records. They're anonymized because they should not be, the journals do not allow them to be publicly available. These are imported directly into an ORCID ID from PubLon. And this is important as well. This is a topic that is easy to integrate into a broader context. So we had actually quite many derivatives arising from this basic training on researcher IDs. In 2015, I was asked by an institute to design a lecture on the strategies to increase researchers' visibility. So the central section of this training was the story about researcher identifiers. This was quite popular, and for some 3 years it was included in training for PhD students. And I'm still quite often invited to give this presentation. And now I've changed it a bit. I shifted the focus to scholarly communication, to the role of identifiers in global scholarly communication and emerging trends, etc. Some tips for you. This is an attractive topic for researchers. And if you plan to organize a series of trainings, this is a good topic to start with, because after this presentation on research identifiers, that is very useful for them, and they will feel grateful, and you would be able to sell them anything, and they will attend any other trainings you organize, because they will be sure that they can trust you and that they will hear something that is interesting for them. If you have the means and support, organize hands-on training. Also, I would strongly advise including this kind of training in regular training for PhD students, but it's better to not to work. We organize this for the students that have just begun their studies. It's more advisable to push it towards the end of the studies when they already have some publications and they will be able to realize the full potential of researcher identifiers. And also an institutional support is useful. All our trainings were more efficient at the institutions which mandated ORCID IDs. We had a more attentive audience and the effects of the training were much better. That's all for me. So I'm now ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milica. It was very useful. I made in a link in the chat once again to EIFL Digital Literacy Training Outline for Librarians. That includes a lot of resources that Milica mentioned, including Google Scholar. And we have some questions. So let's start in the order we see them in the Q&A. The first one is, could you tell us in which databases information search according to ORCID is available?
Yes, I can answer that. I'm not sure if I understand correctly. This refers to in which databases it's possible to search by ORCID ID, for example?
Mm-hmm. I guess so.
Yes. So this functionality in principle can be enabled with our public API and with our member APIs. So APIs stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's basically a tool that allows to exchange information between our registry and any other external systems. For us, it's easier to track the organizations that are using or adding this functionality with the member API. We also have a public API that's free for everyone, and it's managed by the users from within an ORCID ID. So we don't have much control about that. But for example, in Crossref, in DataCite, in Scopus, it's possible to search by ORCID ID. And this is why we recommend all organizations to embed the IDs in metadata, so that more and more organizations can also add this functionality to be able to search by ID instead of by name, as names are not unique, identifiers are.
Thanks a lot. Then that's the last question in the list. Theodosia is asking about how an institution could see which researchers registered for ORCID, for example. How could she see? registered researchers from her university. Is there a way to do so?
Okay, so yes, there are many ways of doing so. At ORCID, as we aim to improve and support interoperability, and that's why we offer these APIs to automate this process and to make information not only human readable, but also machine readable, and this is very important for us. In the ORCID registry, there's an advanced search functionality, and it's possible to search by institution. So if you search by the name of your institution, we'll display results on all the registered IDs that have past or present affiliations with that institution. So that's a way to finding the IDs. The automated way and the way we recommend is that organizations build an integration with our API and allow researchers to connect the ID. And when you offer this functionality, then you can collect all the IDs of the researchers that are currently affiliated with the organization. And we also have a tool that might be interesting for librarians with our API, and I'm going to add the link on the chat box. So it's possible to use the public an API call on the search bar, search by institution name or institutional identifier, and obtain a CSV file with all the IDs that are that have an affiliation, either past or present, with that organization. And let me find the link and add it on the chat.
And Edward was asking whether API is free, so perhaps say that.
Yes, so we have, as you know, ORCID is a non-profit organization, so we finance ourselves through membership fees. Our institutional members can use the member API that allows to collect IDs, import data, but also write data to ORCID records. So that's associated to a membership fee, but we also have a public API that's free to use. With that, you can collect IDs and you can import public data from ORCID into your system. And yes, this is free and available for anyone to use.
Thanks a lot. Then there was a request from Theodosia if you could demonstrate how integrations work, for example, with Lens. Maybe if you could share your screen and show.
Yes,
how that could be done.
Screen and let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to go to Works and search a link, and I'll demonstrate with OpenAIRE, with the OpenAIRE Explore search and link. So here, this is the authentication, meaning that I have to grant access to OpenAIRE for them to add or update information into my ORCID record, and also for them to read or import data from my ORCID record into OpenAIRE. So I'm going to authorize. And now, after authorizing, I have to log in to OpenAIRE, but in this case, I'm already logged in. So they are gathering information from me. So I think I have most of these research outputs already on my ORCID record. But here I have one. In this case, this was a conference presentation, so I'm going to add it to ORCID. And yeah, sorry, in this case, there was an error. Maybe it's because this presentation is already on my ORCID record. And I think, yeah, I've already added most of this on my ORCID record. Yeah. So this one is already on my ORCID record. But yeah, basically that's the way. You go to search and link, and you connect, you authorize the organization to write data on the ORCID record, and then you can import data from that record.
Thank you so much. And Richard asked 2 questions. Please explain the membership fee. I have an ORCID ID, but I do not pay anything. What does it mean?
Yes. So ORCID IDs are free for individuals and will always be. For institutions, we do have a membership fee for those institutions that want to join ORCID and support what we do via institutional fees. And yeah, I can share the fees from our website. We have a basic membership fee, and this allows to have one integration with the member API. And we also have a premium membership, and this allows to have up to 5 integrations or 5 systems connected to ORCID. And again, we offer, as our commitment to remove barriers to access, we also offer a public API that is available to everybody, and that's for free.
Thank you. We also mentioned PubLons, and we didn't explain. It's a website that tracks peer review work, and I put a link in the chat. And Richard asked about using ORCID for organizations, but there is a system movement ROR, registry of organizations, and I also put a link in the chat. Theodosia requested training for librarians on ORCID, and we could talk with colleague and we could plan something together. Nevermore is asking, are we able to search specific papers from specific authors through ORCID and download if available?
So it's possible if you use the ORCID API, then you can search, for example, works by title or by identifier, and then see if that work is already registered or connected in the ORCID registry. However, we do not have the data or the object itself. We only have metadata of that research output. So it's not possible to download the paper directly from ORCID.
Thanks. Richard is asking, what are the benefits for an institution from having multiple API integration?
This allows to connect multiple systems to ORCID. For example, if your institution has CRIS and also host journals, then you can connect the CRIS with ORCID and write data from the CRIS into ORCID. And if you also have, for example, a publishing system for journals your institution hosts, then you can also write metadata about those publications into ORCID. And when an institution connects data to ORCID, the source of the information is the institutional name. So this also helps increase the visibility of your institution and your research outputs.
Thanks. Question about Zenodo from Paula. Adding a trusted organization means that the metadata will be automatically harvested from those registries. Is it so? My publication is on Zenodo and it hasn't been harvested to my ORCID. I thought that would occur automatically since I have Zenodo as a trusted organization. Thanks.
And the answer is no. So if you go to the account settings of your ORCID record, you'll see all your trusted organizations and you'll see the permissions they have. So only those who have right permissions will be able to connect this data to your ORCID record. As Milica explained, currently Zenodo has an integration with ORCID. And the ORCID IDs need to be entered manually as part of the metadata. If the IDs are added in the metadata, then, for example, if you grant permission to DataCite, then this information can be added automatically to your ORCID record, but via DataCite and not via Zenodo directly.
Thank you so much. And then I guess the last question is to Milica from Edmund. Kindly share challenges to get there, I guess, with all the trainings you are doing and how you manage to overcome your challenges.
Well, the good thing is that I normally work with researchers daily. So I work at a small institute and I have an insight into their daily activities. They share their problems with me. And one of the good things that helped me, if you're trying to explain something, you need to know it in detail. So it never works if you're trying to explain the topic that you know only superficially. As for research identifiers, I was lucky enough that my colleagues from my institute they just let me manage their profiles. For example, I sent requests to Scopus to correction changes. Then I registered researcher ID profiles for them. I registered it's only later that they adopted these profiles and started using them themselves. So this was an exercise for me. I had an opportunity to learn how to do these things, and I was aware of the details that are usually available only to researchers. So the first step there is trust. They trusted me, so they entrusted me with this task. After that, when you start explaining to other researchers, they instantly understand that you can help them, that you understand the details, and that you can provide guidance. So that was the way. Of all the trainings I organized, and I cover quite many topics, this is probably physically the most requiring, because we usually have hands-on training, but the mental effort involved in explaining something to them is actually smaller, and there's frictions are not so strong. There are not so many unpleasant questions. It usually goes quite smoothly. So the challenges were smaller than, for example, if you compare to institutional repositories. But you need to have a small group of researchers with whom you will work, who will help you by asking questions, who will let you manage some things for them. And then after that, it will be quite easy to come to the point when you can run so many trainings quite smoothly and with great pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's always reassuring to listen to your experiences. Comfort is asking, please, is the institutional API subscription a one-time issue or it has to be renewed annually?
Yes, our membership is renewed annually. Yeah, the membership fees also have an annual or yearly basis.
Thank you so much, Gabi, Nabil, Milica. Thank you, colleagues, for attending this webinar and for asking questions. I think we answered all of them. Thanks for staying with us longer than planned. I put a link to future webinars, so we'll have a break next Wednesday, and then we'll have 2 webinars about research data management and data management plans, how to train researchers and students about that. And then in June, we'll talk about training researchers and students on preprints, on using social media for research, and it would be Milica's colleague Anna who will do these webinars, and then we'll have 2 more webinars with Neve in the end of June on bibliometrics and tracking research impact.
Thank you, everyone, for joining and for participating. And yes, see you next time.
Thank you, and I'll share slides and recording with everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.